Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. Last February I started researching the 1940s, and this grew out of the World War II challenge that is being hosted by the Vintage Guidebook, So Biased, and Thistle and Stitches, and I will link their contact information down below in the description box. And so over the course of my journey in learning about World War II rationing guidelines and sewing limitations, I found out so much more incredible information. Now, I live here in Texas, and later this month on April the 30th, they are hosting the 80th anniversary of the WASP. And what is the WASP? In World War II, the acronym WASP stood for Women's Air Force Service Pilot. And here in Texas, where I lived, there were actually a few training bases. And on April the 30th, in Sweetwater, Texas, there's going to be a huge celebration of the 80th anniversary of the WASP. And I really wanted to attend this event because there will be a few of the pilots there. And of course, I have to tell you, these amazing women are over the age of 95 now, and to say that the greatest generation, we don't have too many of these fabulous members left. I really was excited to have this opportunity to possibly meet some of these amazing pilots, and I will be taking my camera to the event and will be sharing it with you. So I wanted to create something really special, something that was worthy of this visit. And here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Women's Vintage Society, they plan on attending this event as a group. And these women are absolutely amazing in their 1940s style. And the group actually starts at around the Edwardian to 1920s. You may have seen the Jazz Social video that I posted a few weeks ago. That is the same group that will be at this event. So back in February, as I said, I started this sewing journey, and I had several 1940s patterns, and a few of the garments that I have made I have featured in previous videos, and again I'll link those down below. And so overall, I think I've made a total of 5 1940s blouses, 2 skirts, and 1 dress. And I'm really excited to now have this 1940s wardrobe, which in all honesty, I am gonna wear it in my everyday life. It's very comfortable clothing and easy to care for. But for this grand finale, I had something special in mind. And a few years ago, I was at an estate sale. No surprise, I often find most of my fabric at estate sales. And I actually found 4 feed sacks of the same fabric, which that is like the holy grail in sewing. So it's very rare, and so I really wanted to give the feed sacks their moment, but also be very prepared to cut this fabric. And perhaps there are some of you right now who are cringing at the thought that I'm going to cut vintage Feedsack fabric. And so I just thought I'd share one panel. If you've never seen a feed sack. They're almost the size of a pillowcase. Now, this particular feed sack is not pristine. You can see that there's a big oil spot on either end in the center. So that will be something that I have to work around. On some of the other feed sacks, there's also mildew stains, and I have tried to soak them out, and they've faded to the point that if I carefully piece and perhaps use them on the gathered skirt, you won't really be able to see it too much. So again, these are not pristine feed sacks. These are feed sacks with oil stains, mildew stains. So I feel okay using them. Now, the other fun thing that you can often find on feed sacks, and I'm trying to locate it, here it is, and I'll come in for a close-up. So where the maker's seal would have been, you can see it right there, and that runs in a couple of spots on the fabric. That would have been their lettering as it was folded over. And so that's kind of a fun element, and I'm thinking about positioning that maybe at the back of the bodice or the sleeves. And so this fabric is sort of a modern mid-century take on, I would call them flowers. There's a little center, leaves. Some people might look on them as leaves. And so it would work very well with a feminine style. And I love the sweetheart neckline. So earlier this year, Simplicity has re-released one of its 1940s patterns, and that is number 9464. And I actually will making dress B, which is the red style, in modern fabric first, and that's just so I can get familiar with the pattern, work out any kinks that there might be, again, before I start cutting into this feed sack, which, you know, I can't get more of it. It's limited edition. So then I think I will then, if I have enough fabric, I have to carefully lay it out, because again, the feed sacks are basically 1 yard increments. So one of the feed sacks will end up being the front of the skirt. Another of the feed sacks will be the back of the skirt. And then another will be the bodice, and then the last will be the sleeves. And I will probably have a little bit left over, maybe enough to make something like a small apron. I'm actually in need of a clothespin bag, so that might be a great future project too. And so I think this is going to be a fun sewing journey, which ultimately will culminate in me wearing this dress to the 80th anniversary, celebrating the Women's Air Force Service pilots. And I'm really excited, and I'm just so thankful for the World War II Challenge for really opening up this era to me. It was an era I had not previously researched. My mother was born in 1947. My father was born in 1946. And of course, I had shared in a previous video that both of my grandparents had been married. My grandma Ingalls was a war bride, and I had shared a cute story about her romance with my grandmother in a previous video. So let's get started with how to work around these stains and figure out a layout, and fingers crossed this is going to turn out. Okay, here is the Feedsack with the skirt pattern laid atop of it, and you're supposed to place one edge on the fold. What I'm actually going to do is I am going to save the integrity of this piece by letting the skirt be a little bit wider, and then I'm just going to put a really deep hem on the bottom, and that way it'll kind of hide this hole that's here. There's a little bit of staining on the edge, but as the skirt is gathered, I don't think it'll be too noticeable. That way it saves the entire Feedsack in one piece. So I'm going to use one Feedsack for the front of the skirt and one for the back. And we'll lay out the bodice next. I have the bodice pieces all laid out now, and I only fold it over for as much as I need for my pattern pieces. That really helps on saving on fabric. Now, in terms of my pattern pieces, in order to save all the sides, if it is like a straight edge, you can easily fold it down, which you can see that I've done. I'm cutting out a size 12. I didn't need the size 14. And then if it's a curved edge, what I do is I make little clips in the fabric, just as like if you were going to be attaching a collar, and then I just fold it up, and it helps it to follow the line that is arched. So then that way you can still save all of the available sizing on your patterns. For those who are wondering why it is inside out, it was easier for me to see the stains, and I also marked this so that when I was laying out pattern pieces, if I overlapped where the stain was, I would feel it. So that's how I avoid flaws in the fabric when I'm working in and with vintage material. So by carefully cutting, I was able to avoid this stain as well as this stain. And in addition, it leaves me with a generous amount of yardage. I would say maybe a quarter square to make my peg or clothespin bag that I was talking about that I needed. And even these smaller scraps, I go ahead and save these. I have some vintage quilts from the 20s, 30s, and 40s that we do use. They get laundered about once a year, and when one section gets frayed, I use authentic fabric to patch. Now, if it's newer material, I take bags of scraps to my senior center. There is a ladies' quilt guild that meets at my local senior center, so that's a good place to donate your scraps. This is the front bodice piece, and the first thing it calls to do is stay stitching all around the edge. I know it's kind of hard to see it, but I do always do that. I have put in my bust darts. Now, as you can see, there's an indicator for waist darts. I'm not going to put those in yet because I'm pear-shaped and carry most of my weight in my lower stomach and thigh region. I'm going to wait until I get a little bit closer because these may be very small darts, or I won't even put any darts at all. If that is the case, I'll kind of clean up that edge. So to eliminate that curve, I'll just kind of round it to mimic the other part of the waistline. This is where we are so far. I really like how the Sweetheart neckline has turned out. So I will flip it inside out so you can see some of the details. And I haven't attached the sleeves yet or hemmed them. I will also flip these inside out so you can see how I made the pleat detail. So let me do that. So on my sleeves, I do usually try to do French seaming. I just don't like the feel of an unfinished seam on my arm. It's a tactile issue. I like a more clean finish, so that's what that looks like. So the pleat was really easy to make. I just followed the marking indicators on the pattern piece itself, and then you just brought it together and stitched it, and then ironed it towards the back on either sleeve, and then, you know, we're gonna now hem it. This is the inside of the bodice, and so underneath the facing, where I've joined the facing to the bodice about every 1/4 of an inch, let's see if my camera will focus on that, you can see that I've gone in and I've made a small clip just shy of the stitch line. And that actually goes all the way around the facing. And again, on the shoulder seam, I've done a French seam because I like my seams enclosed. And then once I attached the facing, I then flipped back the back placket over so it's all enclosed. And I find that before I attach a bodice to the skirt and add the sleeves in, I find it's easier to go ahead and create all the buttonholes because you're not fighting against sleeves and skirt material. It's just a smoother process. And I used my serger to finish the edge of the facing. Now that's not historically accurate. For a 1940s dress, you would want to perhaps use a zigzag stitch or some seam binding, but since I'm under a time crunch, I opted to use my serger.